about, I think it was last year, I met Aitabe, and she is the creator of sense thinking, and it's the practice of using intuition and the body's felt sense for more effective learning and problem solving. So I had the opportunity to interview Aitabe, and she'll tell you a little bit more about her background in the interview. And then following the interview, then we will have some breakout rooms, and then we will have time for some live Q&A with her. So I hope you guys will enjoy the interview and maybe have some interesting questions to ask her. And I will let Karun start the interview. Thank you. Thank you, Aitabe, for being here with us today. I would just like to start out with, if you could tell us a little about you and your background.
Well, my background, I trained actually in research science as an undergrad, and that's what I thought I wanted to do, to be a researcher. And I found after spending some time in the lab that I really liked people. And so I took a different path and became I trained in science education, and I taught high school science, to upper level students, so 11th, 12th graders for about a decade in New York City. I loved it very much, actually. And life just took me in a different direction. And the main direction that it took, and which really sort of led to me in this moment, was that in this kind of funny point in the transition of my career, when I had taken some time off from my children who were very young at the time, and I was just about to go back to teaching when I discovered this thing called family constellations. So I, spent some time exploring that. I started teaching again. And so these two things started happening at the same time. One of them was that my return to teaching, I was at a new school, and it was actually really hard. It's a really challenging year. And usually at that point, I was a very experienced teacher. I was well respected by my colleagues. And then I had to jump into this new school. I figured it would be a breeze. And instead, it was really hard for lots of reasons. But one of the main reasons I would say is that the community where the students came from was a low-income urban community, and the school just did not know how to meet the very real needs of their students to create an environment where they felt safe enough to learn. So that's happening in my day-to-day work life. And then I've had this opening to this process called family constellations. What's happening in that space is people show up in a circle and they have deep personal questions that they have to ask. And the group, agrees to help them answer the question, and people start standing up and feeling with their body the question that this person is asking. And it was so remarkable for me to witness this happening and the power of that work. That what happened for me is that I started asking myself, okay, what's happening that they're able to access this field of information so directly with their own bodies? And does that have anything to do with what I might be doing in education? So that's how I got to where I am now in terms of really trying to answer that question.
So yeah, you talked about constellations. For our audience and for people that don't know what constellations is, can you go a little deeper with that?
So family constellations or family and systemic constellations can go by a couple variations of the name. The root of constellation work is it's a therapeutic practice. So people will come and have some personal issue that they're working on. The originator of family constellations, at least the lineage of that every family constellator has, will go back to a specific teacher named Bert Hellinger. But Bert Hellinger, through his particular lineage and experience, had these insights that a family system, that there are patterns that are inherited through a family system. When a family system is presenting, as all of our family systems will inevitably have issues, of course they will have difficulty. What he discovered is that the energy, the life force energy within a family system can be sort of limited or stuck when certain principles are out of balance. And that when you understand what those principles are of a healthy family ecosystem, you can make simple corrections, you could say, or you could see and make adjustments that actually have a profound impact on the flow of love in a family system. That's a family constellation. And so if a person comes to me, and I do family constellation work, they'll present whatever their issue is. Someone recently was asking me about, he's retired recently, and he said, I can't relax. Why can't I relax? And so we looked into this kind of anxiety that he actually feels like he was born with. Like he came in even when he was a very young child and had this like excessive energy. And as we looked into the family system, what we discovered actually was sort of this root of a traumatic. In this case, his father was in the military, in the army, when the H bomb was tested. So he was one of the men who was actually, without volunteering, without knowing that's what he was volunteering, he was put on a boat while the bomb was being tested. So this sort of energetic trauma had impacted his dad, but also had gone into the family system. So that's what we're doing. You have the capacity to identify dynamics that your mind might not be fully aware of, but your body knows.
Sounds fascinating. Sounds very powerful too.
Mm-hmm.
You and I met you in a workshop, and you had talked about sense thinking.
Yeah.
So could you tell me more about sense thinking?
And I'll make a little leap from family constellations to sense thinking. So as I said, Bert Hellinger, one of the things he did, and that we when you're a family constellations facilitator, the principles that you learn are about the balance of love, the flow of love in a family system. So for example, a principle of an order of love would be that there's a flow of give and take, for example. There's a principle of, you could call it just order. In other words, the parent comes before the child. It's very simple, but something is out of order when the child ends up being more parental, or even parenting the child when they're young, right? So that's a kind of upside down space. And that creates an energetic situation in the family system. So that's a family constellation. When I started looking at what was happening and the way in which people are accessing information, the field of information of the family system, I started looking at different patterns. So I wasn't looking at family system patterns. I was looking at patterns of information. What I call sense thinking is really the way in which I'm describing how we access patterns of information through our bodies. And so there's a kind of what I call the 5 dimensions of inquiry. There's a kind of order in which everyone, once you learn the order, you can easily access a field of information of any question you have. So if it's a question about history or politics, or some problem you're having in an organization, when you follow the 5 dimensions of inquiry, you can start to use your sensing to feel into the dynamics that are happening in that system of the question.
So you said there's 5 questions. Could
Mm-hmm.
you define those 5 questions for us?
Yeah. They're called the 5 dimensions of inquiry, and it's really simple. The first is to ask questions that matter. It's a simple idea, but it's actually when we ask questions that matter, that are important to us, we are really shifting our power, becoming more empowered right here, as opposed to what's typically happens in an educational context or in a mainstream context, is that you're given what you should care about, right? Here's the information, here's the curriculum, let me give. And so immediately it takes over where you're supposed to direct your attention, and it disempowers you. And in fact, one of the things we see is that when people finish school and they get out into the world, they really actually struggle with how to, there's a kind of passivity, because people don't really know how to access their own power. And your power, every person's power, actually begins with where you direct your attention. So when you ask questions that matter, one of the things I talk about when and I'll share now, but we're doing two really important things. We're directing our attention and we're setting an intention. And that's power. As humans, it's one of the capacities that we have to sort of create a new world, create the world that we care about, is going to be, it begins with how we direct our attention and the intention we have when we do that. So the first dimension of inquiry is asking questions that matter. The second question is to think systemically. What I say is that every question is embedded in a system. When you begin to recognize, oh, this question is connected to a whole web of relationships. What are the relationships involved in this question? Again, this is an incredibly empowering space to be. Again, one of the things I see in mainstream education, or even just in the world right now, is that we're often given a topic to study, and we're giving the interpretation of the topic. Those things go hand in hand. And with this process, we're kind of decoupling those things. We're creating the topic, and then we're setting aside the interpretation and beginning first with, okay, well, what is involved in this question, in this issue, in this question, in this thing that matters to me? So yeah, that's the first one, ask questions that matter, think systemically, so you can see the relationships involved in the question. So the third dimension is called see spatially. And I love this one because it's like the first indication that something's really different. Like, the way I hold asking questions is different than in a traditional context. It's still, we know what it means to ask a question, right? And the way I hold thinking and thinking systemically is, again, another variation on a kind of mainstream approach. But by the time we get to seeing spatially, this is really a different step and it's accessible. I mean, the thing about taking the step to see spatially is that every bit of information we have could be also mapped out as a kind of relationship between parts. And it immediately adds a new level of information. So even if you're reading an article in the newspaper or a book, you could stop for a moment. And if it's something you really care about, you could say, okay, if I were to imagine character A and character B, how close would they be to each other? So this is what I mean by seeing spatially, sort of imagining them in a three-dimensional space and how they might be oriented towards each other. Maybe one's looking away, maybe one's looking down or at something else. So seeing spatially is one of my favorites to introduce, because if you didn't learn anything else from me, except that, here's an idea. I could take this scene that I'm reading and I could map it out with my students. It will already, bring new ideas and insights, and new, if you're writing a research paper, for example, and you have the topic that you're studying, and you created a little map or create little objects and place them around on your table. I'd be fascinated to see what new questions you come up with, because you're looking at this body of information, this field of information in a different way. So that's the third dimension. The fourth dimension is when you get into what I think of when I think of sense thinking, is I'm really like in the body. And this will be familiar if a person knows family constellation work, they'll be familiar with this step, because this is the step where you can actually physically stand up and say, okay, I'm going to actually feel what it's like to stand with character A, feel in my body where my attention goes and how it feels. Do I feel light and happy? Do I feel kind of heavy? Are there parts in my body that feel certain ways? So I can feel character A, or I can feel character B, or I could feel even abstract things. I could feel the river, or I could feel an idea, and see how the idea itself relates to the system. So if the fourth step is feeling relationally. I think that's how I phrase it. There's a lot more I could say about the feeling part. It's one of the places where, when you introduce this practice and you introduce family constellations, it's the part where I think people are most profoundly impacted, because all of a sudden they are aware that they're tapping into the field of information and they didn't know it was possible before. Like before that moment, they're like, I'm just making all these things up in my head. right? With my thinking mind. The moment you step into the field and you feel relationally the parts of the system, all of a sudden you become aware that there is information your body is making contact with that you couldn't have thought of. And that is quite, it's really exciting to realize, to start to realize that this is an affirmation for many people of what they've always understood, that we live in a living world. We live in a living conscious universe. Fifth dimension of inquiry is the dynamic. So perceive dynamically or sense dynamically. And what this means is when this often comes up pretty early on. It's not like these steps are not necessarily linear, but it's when you make a change in the system and you can feel how the system changes in response. Or the way there's lots of structures you can use for doing a sense thinking inquiry or a constellation. One structure I use is one that seems to go through like cycles. So it's like different points in time almost. And so you can move the same cluster of the same system. You can move it through different points of time. So that kind of dynamic will be evolving, and you'll feel how the different parts of the system change as the cycle moves through. Yeah, so that's the dynamic dimension.
Fantastic. How can we as change makers or as leaders use sense thinking?
Mm-hmm. It's, so what's happening is the reason I'm pausing because I have two kind of lines of response, and I'll say them both, I think, but I noticed they're coming up right now. Our ways of knowing, and I suspect your audience knows this, right? Our ways of knowing go far beyond thoughts that pop up in my head or things I read in a book, right? Way, way beyond that. Sense thinking allows us to have a living relationship with the field of consciousness, the field of information behind everything. A teacher I'm reading right now talks about form as being just a touch point of the field of consciousness. It's a representation of the larger field of consciousness. So all matter has behind it this field of information. So that's what we are doing, is we're tuning into, we're actually saying, hey, I have this plant next to me. I can connect with these plants and say, hey, what do you need? Right? And I can listen in lots of different ways. And that's what the 5 dimensions of inquiry do, is that they give me ways to listen into what this field of information wants to communicate with me. So that's the purpose of it. And so how can you use that to address the questions that you care about? I mean, there's some very practical ways. My favorite thing to do, when you saw a little bit at the workshop, my favorite thing to do is to sit with someone and really be a partner, a listening partner with them while they move through the 5 dimensions of inquiry. So they begin with the thing that they want to make sense of, and you can help them figure out what their question is and what the parts of the question is. And then once they figure out the parts of the question, you can start mapping out a few of those points, or maybe all of them, but usually I like to start with maybe 3 points. And then just talking together about what you notice, what it feels like when you witness this field. And then you can start proposing, okay, what would happen if we introduce something new? Or is this arrangement, this system that I'm looking at and feeling into, is it pointing me to something that I hadn't seen before? Like, where's the mystery? The gift of this work is that it helps us uncover hidden dynamics. It helps us see what's been hidden, and hidden just because we just weren't aware of it, or who knows why. I mean, sometimes things are hidden because they're actually secrets. They're actually, in a family system, there are things that the family may have felt they didn't want future generations to know. And if, depending on what it is, that some of that can actually be felt, continue to be felt in the family system. So there are ways in which what's happening is you're able to see things that have been hidden. One way to think about a problem is that if this is the field of the problem here, the solution is going to be outside this circle. Because if the solution were here, you would have already found it, right? So the solution will always be found in the thing that you can't quite see just yet. And even if you see all the parts, even if the solution is actually within this circle right here, if you haven't found it as a solution, then it means that the parts are held together in a way that's there's like a misconception or erroneous belief that's holding together the system in an incorrect way. And so when you do these kinds of process where you're looking through the 5 dimensions of inquiry, you can start to see, oh, the system doesn't flow when it's arranged in this way. What happens? What can we do to rearrange the system that will create more ease in the system?
Yeah, that makes a lot of sense to be able to have that as yes, absolutely. I think we all have those questions that are within ourselves, and as we're trying to, bring personal transformation, but also expand that into our communities and, and beyond. Absolutely. I know for me personally, I've recently been getting more involved in local projects here and in Hawaii, and I've been working at a culture site. I've been, and I met you in that workshop and getting into education and teaching. I've been wondering to myself, like, what is my question that I'm trying to, I don't know, I don't want to say solve, but that question that I know my question, it's about spirituality, and how do I introduce spirituality, maybe through culture and place, to take those steps into sense thinking. I think would be really valuable to get closer to that solution, or at least a path forward.
That's right.
Because I think, it's something that for me, to expand spirituality and to introduce it or to share it more so with others. And I feel like I have this beautiful place we have so many people that come and visit from far, and
Wonderful.
Yeah.
Well, one of the things I would say, a kind of clue for any of us who are asking the question about, what is the problem I'm here to solve, is to look out when we, the world we experience is a mirror of something in our inner state, and so there's oftentimes the kinds of questions that are going to be really valuable for you will be the ones that are closest to you, maybe even so close you can't immediately see them, right? But when you discover that there's something you're in the world that's like some tension, that's a really great place. That's a really great inquiry that you can bring, oh, this tension in the world that I'm experiencing in myself, in this moment, in this relationship, or in this situation. Let me just see what is that question? What's the question inside of me that's causing the tension? And then let me map out and feel into the system of that question. Because one of the greatest ways that we serve is when we are able to remove any entanglements. And this is, classic from Bert Hellinger, is that if we are personally entangled in a situation, then we're inadvertently contributing to its dynamic. And I'll share with you a very personal way, just a little one, which is very recently. I was working with someone, and they were disappointed. They were disappointed with how I led the processes, and I remember feeling like a mix of feelings. And, I was like, oh, but, I did my best, or you asked me to do it, like all these things. It was like this could feel inside of me, the stirring. But one of the things I paid attention to was that there's this little kind of space that I felt that the moment they said they needed help, there's a part of me that wanted to rush in and help. Like a person needing help will activate in me the need to rescue, right? So that's already a dynamic it's a pattern. And so when we create this sort of victim rescuer dynamic, as we might do when we're a helper, right? Then it actually pulls out a dynamic in this person, rather than acknowledging their power, the God spark inside of them that has the capacity to resolve the solution. And your job is just to be, a mirror to help reflect themselves back to them. If you're place yourself immediately in a helper dynamic where you're trying to rescue them, that actually has a tendency to bring up inside of the person you're helping or you didn't do good enough, you're disappointing me, you're, all sorts of things. So it's, the instinct is good. Of course, we want to serve and help. There's nothing wrong with that. But it's really valuable for me to become really clear, really healthy about, well, that pattern is actually something in my family system, the pattern to help. And it was a way that I tried to keep myself safe and tried to create my home environment into a more safe place, for example. So the questions that are closest to you are often the ones that are going to be most valuable when it comes to, the impact that you're going to have.
Yeah, I think that's really important. Thank you for sharing that. Really appreciate that. Is there anything else that you could share with us that you think that would be important that I...
Mm-hmm. Sense thinking. So there's the root of my work comes from family constellations, and sensing is that kind of next step removed. And what I found, this is kind of like a cautionary tale, which is that once you get a person into their body and their senses, because that is where we store our trauma, it becomes very easy to make contact with those spaces within us that are carrying the trauma. It's really important that, whenever we're on a path of helping and service, we really have to continue to do our own work to heal the spaces in us that need healing. If it wants to be seen, if it wants to be healed, it will show up for you. And so we think of the things as these disturbances showing up in our world, or the difficulties that might arise in a relationship, as being problems that are coming to us, but really they're also invitations to us to be. I often think of it as a healing invitation. So, it's the gift and the caution are in some ways the same thing. Like, the gift of this work is that it brings you into embodied present moment contact with the field of consciousness around you. And a lot of people, because they've become so separated, they haven't actually done a lot of work to make sense of what is all this stuff going on in my body. What is this feeling that I keep suppressing, or things like that. And you will make contact with that when you start to do sense thinking. So you want to be supported when you begin that journey.
Yeah, I think that's wonderful advice. Thank you very much. Yeah, no, I can see that. Definitely can see that. Even just after spending the hour with you in the workshop prior to this, it was just a very inspiring experience. But it definitely opened my mind a lot and had a lot shifting. And like you said, more connection from within. I realized how connected I was to certain things I didn't know, that I was not aware of. So that's fantastic. So I appreciate that.
Good. Yeah. That hidden, right? It helps you see the things that you've sort of been blind or obscured to you. Yeah.
Yes, but it's also very empowering.
Yes.
Further notice, I want to introduce Aitabe for, she'll be here. She's here live with us. So thank you, Aitabe, for joining us. Really enjoyed watching the interview again. So definitely, let's see. So yes, we have an open space now to discuss, and you can raise your hand. You can use the chat. I also left the mentee poll, the mentee question open. So if somebody would like to anonymously to write a question, you can go to the mentee.com, and I have it open so I can share the question. So that is an opportunity too. So again, I'm going to open it up, and so Aitabe, is there anything you'd like to say before we get started?
Yeah, I think I'll just, it was great to see it again also. And there's really just 3 points I think are worth kind of just distilling that very rich conversation. So I'm going to paste them into the chat as well as say them out loud. And so the first one, let me make sure I have it here to everyone in the meeting. Okay, good. The first one is just that a reminder that when we're looking to solve a problem, the solution is always found outside of what we currently understand or the actions we're currently taking. So in other words, if you're working to solve a problem or trying to make sense of something, if you haven't gotten the solution yet, that's because the answer is not yet in your actions or your perception. And that's a really useful reminder, right? Because it means, oh, there's something else I need to see. So that's the first little bit. The second thing I would say, and which in our educational system, we haven't really been taught this one, which is that each person has the innate capacity to sense the difference between a system that is healthy and a system that's unhealthy. It's just a natural, it's just sort of a natural gift of our being alive, right? And I refer to this as the energetic signature of health, or the energetic signature of truth. And so we might know this, perhaps hopefully we know that at some level in the context of our own physical bodies. But what this process introduces you to is that actually you have the capacity to sense this even for systems that seem to be outside of you in some way, like, a problem you're looking at in the world or in a community. And so the final piece I'll say, and then I'll get to some questions here, which is simply what is sense thinking? And it's just, sense think is just one tool that you can use to help you identify specifically what parts of the system might need to be shifted in order to bring the whole system into health.
Thank you, Aitabe.
Mm-hmm.
That's great. So we have one question here: is your work related to somatic healing?
Yeah, absolutely. And I just want to say hi, Vijay. Vijay, we're actually neighbors.
Oh, yeah,
Good to
yeah.
see
No,
Dan.
I just went, oh, wait a minute. It hit me that you look familiar. Right.
Where I'm like, we're just down the street from each other, or
I'm
we're
so
on the other
used to-
side of the
I'm
town.
so used to everybody on the screen being from some other country that then I went, no, wait a minute. She sounds familiar. That's funny.
Yeah. So is it related to somatic healing? Absolutely. It's related somatic healing is typically for this body, right? Our personal selves. And sense thinking is really about taking that same capacity we have and applying it towards any other problem we might want to be inquiring into. Spiritual mediumship and family constellations, are they similar? That's an interesting question. I'm just going to take a moment with the question. Well, I would say, yes, and the ways in which they're similar have to do with how are we sensing into non-physical information, energetic fields of information. It's different in that I'm not contacting other I'm not generally not, and when I do sense thinking, we're looking at more sort of practical questions, more like earth questions, as opposed to what mediumship can do, which is often in a kind of other dimensional spaces. So that would be the difference in terms of where I'm placing my attention. But in terms of kind of generally the capacity for a body, a person to sense into non-physical fields of information, then yes, there's definitely similarities. The family constellation way of thinking is the only way to explore ourselves and our surrounding. We have to ask relevant questions, explore systematically, comprehensively, and deeply. And finally, test our understanding of the question against the other situation. This would determine how general the answer is. Thank you. Yes, so testing your question and testing in other situations, I mean, that really is the key, right? So even whether I'm using my mind, kind of mental thinking or a discussion to come up with solutions, or I'm using this tool to kind of sense into energetic dynamics in a system, the solution ultimately will be, does it solve this problem? Does it bring this problem, not just fix like a Band-Aid, but actually bring the system into greater health and connection and flow? And what can I use from what I learned here and apply it to something else to also bring that system into greater flow? So sense thinking and any kind of intuitive sensing, at least the way I'm introducing it, is always about being of highest service for the whole system. That's what we're looking at, not just like fixing it in the immediate and not, yeah, I think that's enough. That's enough to say about that. Yeah.
I do have a question here too that somebody wrote it anonymously. What is a simple way to apply this knowledge in our daily life?
Sure. Well, it always helps for me to answer questions to have a kind of sense of, what's a question you're looking at in your life. And so, and part of that is because my mind always goes blank. When I'm being interviewed, my mind all of a sudden is like, I can't think of any problems. And there's no problems in the world. So let's say we're talking about a small system. It could be a family system. It could be a group of people you're working with. Very, very common where there will be tensions arise or problems or just difficulty in, the work you want to do is not fitting somehow. There's a conflict. So this is a very simple and excellent way to look at what is the meaning of this conflict? Why is it happening? But what I want to say about that, because I don't want to get too abstract, is oftentimes the very first step of the process is about the question. When I'm working with someone, I spend a lot of time just listening to them tell me what is the difficulty that they're working with. And I keep listening and asking questions to help the other person clarify the question. Because when you get really, really clear about what your question really is and what you really see that the problem, what the problem really is, you are halfway there, maybe even more than halfway there to finding the solution. It's the same thing as what I said about, a problem is always kind of the solution is outside the scope of the problem. Oftentimes when a person has a question, a challenge that they're working with, they're not aware that they also have the answer inside. So in that first step, when you're listening to a person's question, part of what you're doing is you're helping them start to see the parts of the question that might have been hidden to them. And all of a sudden they'll realize, oh, here's the solution right here. Yeah, so that's a very, very practical way, is just how do I listen and talk to someone to help them see their question more clearly? Mm-hmm.
That makes a lot of sense. Yeah. In our group, we were talking a lot about that. I mean, we had a really dynamic discussion in our group. And one of the things that you really triggered for us was bringing up the idea of the question and then also creating space for the person asking the question, or also creating space for ourselves and to make sure that we were healthy, that we were doing what was necessary to maintain our health, and making sure we were checking within ourselves so we could be more supportive and be able to be better active listeners and be healthier and helping others. I found that to be like, you really brought that. Yeah,
that really is the key.
There's a question in the chat from the Spanish group.
Mm-hmm.
Is it more convenient to do a constellation in a group or only with the constellator, I guess the individual?
An individual. Well, I have this is like Krishna Prema, when you were asking me questions and like a couple answers show up at the same time. So I'm having that moment right now. Like there's two kinds of answers. If you're familiar with family constellations, so to the person who asked the question, if you're familiar with family constellations, one of the things you understand, you may understand, is that Bert Hellinger, the founder, the person who created this process, he evolved as a practitioner. So he evolved from one way of doing family constellations to actually becoming more and more attuned to every individual who came to him. And he had the capacity, his sensing was so sensitive that he had the capacity to sense within another person where the shift needed to happen. Oh, did I? Okay. And so as you work in this process, a lot will depend on what you want to get out of it. If you are working with a group of people who are just beginning to develop their capacity to sense, groups are great. Groups are amazing. And the reason why group is amazing, because it's valuable for the whole community, for everybody who's participating, because all of a sudden they will discover they have the capacity to feel information that's meaningful and can bring a system into health. That's very empowering. So I highly recommend groups for that reason. At some point, there will be an evolution, which is that you will realize, oh, there's actually places that when it comes to solving certain problems or working with certain individuals, and even for you as a practitioner, as you become more sensitive, you'll realize, oh, it's actually really fast and efficient for me just to work one-on-one with another person. So it kind of depends a little bit on your purpose. What is more convenient? Convenience would say if you have a skilled facilitator, a skilled constellator, you could just work one-on-one. That's convenient. But if you want to be in a community and experience the power of working collectively to solve a problem, I highly recommend a group. Mm-hmm.
Thank you. That's fantastic. A lot of great. Yeah, one thing we all discussed, I think a lot of us want to go a lot deeper. So that was another thing in our group, was just kind of you kind of scratch the surface for us, and we're very excited to learn more. Oh, here's something in Spanish. Oh, like Karun.
Yeah. While I'm translating that, the one ahead, in a school or corporation where the system is broken, can we find small solutions to improve the system? Or is it better to leave that system and try to start a new one?
Thank you for asking this question. It's such a good question. One colleague talks about, so I have a colleague who has one kind of answer, and I'm going to tell you what his answer is. He says that the system is always bigger than the individual. It's a kind of reminder that when we go in as an individual, the system shapes us. There's a reason for this. We, even though I appear to be, we appear to each other as individuals, I am actually always just a kind of moment-to-moment expression of a whole field of information, right? So that system is always influencing me. So if you're not conscious of that relationship, then the system will always be shaping you. The moment you become conscious of that relationship, you have the capacity to change the system. And you can also develop the skills to kind of more to figure out, oh, how exactly can I influence a system that will create positive change? But if systemic change is what you want, that's actually it's churning. It's a churning experience, right? Because if we're asking for the system to collapse, really, there's a lot of we as individuals will need to do to make sure that we are really in alignment with our own, contact with our own divine nature. Like there's an inner alignment that we want to be able to hold, if that's our intention, is to be seeding change within a system. And I think that actually is. I mean, we are living inside of a system. If you step outside of a system and say, oh, I don't want to be in the school system, let's say, I want to start new schools. That's how I want to start new schools, But it's the same kind of thing. We often, because our form is informed by these large fields, it will be a process of becoming conscious of the ways in which the old system has shaped me, So that way I'm not actually recreating those old patterns when I try to create something new.
Mhm.
But it's an ongoing process. It's a learning. We agree to to do this together as a community, as you all are doing.
Look,
Okay.
we have one more question.
Well, yeah, and I'm perhaps Dada can help with understanding it. This I use Google Translate, and it matches my understanding of Spanish as far as I go. How is the formation of the family constellation, which is only a tool, connected with the formation of the monks of Anandamarga with the information of sound? It's that last part that I don't quite understand.
Actually, the maybe she's using the word formación, meaning education or training.
Oh, that could be.
Yeah, not formation, but training. So it would be something like how the training in family constellation, which is a tool, compares to the training of the monks of Anandamarga with the information about sound, maybe mantras she means. Yeah.
Can you give us some signal, either Mirabai or Devesh? Does that sound like a better translation? Maybe.
Beautiful question. I have no idea. I mean, I personally hear that.
Okay, he's saying in the Spanish room that he's not sure.
Okay.
I think, Aitabe, I think you replied it just when you were expressing just now in the beginning, in 1 minute ago, where you said that if someone wants to do a systemic change, one must be really aligned with one's own divine nature.
Yeah.
And actually, that's the process of meditation, or the training of meditation is actually to do that. Mm-hmm. So I think you already replied, basically.
Yeah.
There's a little bit more in the chat, and then let me translate that. Or you can do it faster, Dada.
Well, she's adding that Sarkar, which is our teacher, he teaches that glands create reality in the system, and so we do asanas and we practice mantras to balance the glands. Yeah, I think.
So it sounds like that is a be aware of the system, and the glands are part of that, and it's a different way, and yet related.
Absolutely.
Yeah.
Thank you. Absolutely, all related, and without directly responding to that specific question, in my own work, I also and help people work at these different entry points, and one of them is really kind of much more embodied, working with the way in which my body, this is what I referred to in the interview, when you as you start to sort of we have experiences every day that remind us that, oh, I've got information stored in my body. And it's often stored in the way I talk about it, it's often stored as emotional energy that just has sort of stuck emotional energy in the body. And so there's lots of ways to liberate that stuck emotional energy.
Yeah. We have a song that again, it's kind of the same topic and kind of different, but it's called "Can I Learn to Feel the Same Things That You Do?" So let me share that.
And yes, and thank you, Aitabe. Thank you so much for being here. It was fantastic. Thank you.
Thank you.